thank you very much for coming here and giving us such a fascinating lecture. Now you talked about the big data possibilities for collecting prices and some of the work that you've done on producing price indices for countries that haven't wanted necessarily people to know what their inflation rate is. What would you say are the lessons in what you've done for a country like the United Kingdom or the United States that has a well-developed price index that, for better or worse, we feel reasonably comfortable with?
Right. So the basis of my talk was to emphasize what I think is the key contribution in a country like the UK. I think there is an opportunity to improve the data collection we currently have while maintaining the same methodologies in terms of price index measurement that we've been using for a long time. So I see all this big data revolution as mostly a data collection opportunity. And that means, of course, I'm not saying the old data collection is necessarily wrong. It's just that it is costly, it is slow on many dimensions, and we could take advantage of these new data sources to cover broader categories, get more products than we currently are able to do on a faster, more real-time basis, and we can achieve levels of granularity that we couldn't do before. And I emphasize the data collection side because there's been a significant amount of research in trying to see if new price indexes can be developed with this new type of big data. And I tend to think that comes later. The first thing that I would do is take the current statistics that we measure, and we know how to measure them, and let's take advantage of the new data sources to do this better. And then at a second stage, we can say, okay, then how can we apply these new big data tools for other measurement indices and purposes that we couldn't measure before? That's a little bit what I try to focus on. Now, if you ask me, what should, for example, ONS be doing right now in this dimension? I think it is important for ONS and statistical agencies around the world to take this beyond just research. I think enough time has been spent on just the research side. And the reason I argue that is you really make advances when you try to take this into production. And I'm not saying necessarily replace the CPI. I'm saying ONS, for example, could start producing an experimental web scrape index, and the actual task of having to produce it and maintain it on a regular basis will inform ONS of the real challenges in practice that producing it actually entails. No? And I think we will learn a lot more from that than just doing experimental research type of papers, which as an academic I can tell you it's a very controlled environment. No? And we may have theories, we may think, oh, if we make assumptions of what we think in practice we could do, but until we actually take that step and try to produce an index, however experimental, however limited, and I think ONS should be straightforward that this is an experimental, mistakes will be made. But I think that's the stage where I'm trying to convince some statistical agencies to move forward and take it to the next level in terms of production.
Well, certainly ONS, over the last 10 years has been producing statistics it described as experimental, and I think that's worked very well.
Mm-hmm.
They used to be rather nervous about releasing things before they were confident that they were absolutely beyond reproach, whereas actually, of course, you need outside users to test things, and releasing experimental data has been a way of doing that. So perhaps the ONS can be encouraged to produce an experimental version of the CPI, which relies rather more heavily on the web or relies on web data to the extent that it can. Now, I actually started my career running the cost of living indices in Malawi, and this was 40 years ago, and data were then very rudimentary.
Right.
In your experience for what I suppose I could call some of the least developed countries, do you think those are now at a stage where things like food prices and so on can be collected from the web, or do we still need enumerators going round buying heaps of tomatoes and then weighing them?
Well, it will depend on the country and the sector we're looking at. It is true that when we started collecting data online, we thought that we wouldn't be able to find much data in developing countries, but we have, in particular food, fuel, sometimes things that are not actually bought online. Fuel is a perfect example, but you do find data sources online that you can take advantage of and then build the capacity to collect a massive amount of information without a big workforce that has to physically visit the stores. Sometimes people ask me, for example, services. There are services online. We actually have to go to a restaurant and purchase the service of the restaurant, but the menus of restaurants are all online today because they're trying to convince the customers when they visit the website to come and be physically present. And of course, the transaction takes place offline, but we can take advantage of that online information to collect those prices. And sometimes in countries where you find very little online transactions actually happening, not many things are sold online, you do find a tremendous amount of online information about offline prices that you can still use. And then just beyond just using online scrape data, part of my talk today was arguing that we should consider other technologies. I think in some countries it could, where there's not much online, we could think of using crowdsourcing as an alternative way. Everybody is carrying around phones these days. There are a lot of freelancer websites and people that are getting used to this gig economy where they get paid to do certain tasks. And part of the research project I was describing today in Venezuela was testing if it was even feasible to get reliable information every week on a fixed set of products that I could use as the basis of a CPI index. And in a country like Venezuela, it seems to work quite well. And I would imagine in many other countries, these, for particular categories of goods or services, this could be an alternative for some statistical agencies without, there may be some categories of goods where we don't need such a highly qualified and workforce. No? And we can use those people that are well trained to focus on the categories that are harder to measure and that require really specialized knowledge. Whereas some things like collecting the price of some electronics may not require that knowledge at all.
You mentioned, just as a sort of tantalizing thought or tantalizing for your audience, that you'd had some ideas on how the measurement of the calculation of consumer price indices itself might change. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Sure. I think the methodologies we use for measuring the cost of living make a lot of sense given the data sets we have had in the past. But now that we have the ability, for example, to see everything that a store sells, and not only everything good that they sell, but we can actually detect from the moment a good enters the store until it actually leaves, we can follow the price of that good. It changes dimensions like, for example, quality adjustment. If you think about it, the way we are dealing with quality adjustment today is a little bit a function of the censoring that we have in the price data. Because if you are following a few goods, because physically it is costly to go to the stores, the data collectors would follow the price of a TV, and when that TV disappears, that's when they would switch to a different model. And maybe there was a model that had been sold for several months. We just were not collecting that information. And when we see that switch, we have to decide how much of that is a price change versus a quality change. That's what the hedonics methodology is trying to do. Now, if you think about it, the hedonics is trying to supplement with the pricing of the characteristics for all that past information of the second model of a good that we hadn't observed. Now, with big data and with online data, for example, you don't have that problem. The spells of prices that you observe are full from the moment it enters to the moment it disappears. So we can statistically detect some of these patterns before they happen. We can decide, depending on the category of good, if we really need to make big quality adjustments or not. Sometimes just having, the price of 100 different TVs and taking a simple average gets you to a very good estimate of the actual inflation rate of that category under certain assumptions, no? But I think it opens us, the fact that we have so much granularity and so many details of the data, and we can observe so many goods from the moment they're entered until they disappear, it changes what is feasible in terms of quality adjustments, for example. And there are the other dimensions like that I think we need to explore more.
Well, one particular worry we've had in the UK is that actually specific types of goods are followed for slightly too long. So you pick up a fall in price as the residual stock is sold off.
Exactly.
And then link on to the next price.
Exactly.
The price of the next good, putting that fall in, that terminal fall in the price sort of into the number.
Exactly. So what happens in practice when we collect data online, that good that is having the big sale is actually being compensated by another good that is not having that sale when you're taking these averages. So you're less affected by that sort of bias or pattern of that specific good you're following now. So absolutely, I mean, you're describing something that actually makes it even worse. So that's the sort of research I think is the type of research we need, no? But I think of it more as a second stage, because what we first need to figure out is if we can use these new data collection tools in a reliable way in production. Imagine ONS starts getting some scrape data and they notice it has holes, it is not as complete as the data they get sending people physically to the stores. Then it becomes a little bit of a irrelevant question. It's not worth to do it. I argue, no, let's focus first on getting the data right and making sure we can at least have the same quality of data we had with the previous tools, and hopefully even better. And then we can explore more complicated dimensions where we can improve the measurement of cost of living, like quality adjustment.
Well, I should have thought actually you'd be less prone to having gaps in the data if they're collected from the web.
Right.
Because a collector goes to one shop and the item is missing there, but
yes,
it's actually available in the other
I agree.
Branches of the same store.
Exactly. No, so that I think is the case, but that's something that I've experienced, and I'm trying to convince people. But it's not. I mean, it's not so easy to do, because this is not a set of skills that for data collection that statistical agencies already have, so they have to develop it, no? And the initial web scraping that may be done in-house may not produce the same quality of data as a well-proven method of visiting the stores that has been done for 50 years. So I'm just saying ONS needs to invest in perfecting the method of data collection, doing it in-house, and once they are comfortable enough that they have, like you mentioned, they should have, because these goods are available in these stores all the time, consistently there. So it's a matter of getting the technology to collect those prices right. And once they have that data, then the possibilities of improving the price indices become greater.